Hey everyone, welcome to our second to last happy hour of 2020, just 2020, not 2021. Obviously, I hope y'all are all getting ready to enjoy the holiday season in a safe and socially distanced manner. For those of you who don't know, we actually have runoff elections happening right now, so I'm going to tell you when and where those are. On December 12th, we have runoffs in Missouri City and El Paso, Harris, and Webb counties. And then on December 15th, we have runoffs in Corpus Christi, and then Galveston, Kaufman, and Travis County. You can head over to vote411.org/ballot. I will drop it into the comments later. And over there, you can figure out who you got to vote for, where you got to vote, all that kind of good stuff. Diana, Ed, Wesley, welcome. Texas has really been in the news. But before we get to that, something very important. If we were doing an office white elephant party, what would you get for the person what would you get for the event? I know I would get a ring light because we're in the Zoom world and we all need a ring light.
We can all use ring lights. So I am the either the best or worst white elephant gift giver, depending on who you ask. I have given in years past a sandwich. I literally went by Subway on the way to the white elephant party and I got a foot long. I went big. Another year I gave a 5-pack, which was a 6-pack of beer, of which I drank one on the way to the party. I think the safest thing I could probably give would be a puzzle. A puzzle's something that I think most people like. It fits all walks of life. I found a really cool puzzle down at Toy Joy, which is the toy store in downtown Austin a couple of years ago. And it had a bunch of women leaders on it, illustrated. And I thought it was pretty fun. So puzzle would probably be what I would have done this year.
That's pretty cool. How about you, Diana?
So I would give this amazing gift that I've been using during most of the quarantine, which is a tortilla blanket. I love it so much. I always use it in my lap because I get cold easily. And I think not only does it keep me warm, it looks very cool. And we're in Texas. Who doesn't love tortillas? So that's what I would give. The gift of comfort and warmth.
Good. How about you, Wesley?
So Diana actually stole mine. I was also going to say a blanket, but I have this other type of blanket that's also really soft. It's called like Barefoot Dreams or something like that. And it's like my favorite blanket that I have because it's stretchy and I use it all the time while we're working too. And I think with everyone staying home right now, it's like the best time of the, best time for a blanket with COVID. So
I'm really missing that we're not having a white elephant right now because I would love an extra blanket. Thanks for sharing that, y'all. So if you unless you live under a rock, you've heard the name Ken Paxton this week. And I'm not going to tell you why, but our 3 experts will. So just one, if you want to kick it off with what exactly Ken Paxton's been up to this week.
Yeah, so I can give a little bit of background. So this week, Ken Paxton filed suit directly in the Supreme Court against 4 key battleground states that voted for Joe Biden. And the states he's suing include Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And what he wants is to throw out their votes and overturn the results of the 2020 election, which I think we can all agree is just ridiculous. This lawsuit is frivolous. Ken Paxton is wasting taxpayer dollars, Texas taxpayer dollars on this lawsuit. And what we really think is that he's just looking for a presidential pardon. He wants to get in Trump's favor by filing this lawsuit and continuing on with this, whole message and scheme of trying to reject the votes of a democratic election. The fact of the matter is states can't sue other states just because they don't like the results of their election or they don't like the way they've ran their elections. And a lot of top legal scholars and top lawyers have come out and basically just said this suit is ridiculous.
Yeah, and if states could sue other states for not liking the outcome of the elections, Texas would have been sued ad nauseum for years at this point. Also, something that just came out in the news this morning is that joining Ken Paxton's lawsuit are the fictitious states of New California and New Nevada. These are states that do not exist. And the attorney for New California was sure to include his bar license from old California. So they got that going for them, I guess. That just kind of speaks to how ridiculous this whole thing is.
I think what's happening is sort of like when you have a file and you really don't like the way it turned out. And so Ken Paxton's trying to remake these states. So it's sort of like, Texas final, New Mexico final.
version 2 - use this one.
Yeah.
Kathy and David on Facebook, you're right. This is like really embarrassing for all of us in Texas. David, I see that you're a Republican, and even you are kind of saying like, what is going on? Wesley, question for you to clear up some potential confusion that many of us might have. Who runs elections? Is it the federal government or is it a state?
So elections are run by the state. There are federal laws that states have to follow when it comes to elections, but by and far, the states have the power to decide how their elections are run. And one big thing that Paxton is kind of claiming in this lawsuit is that because some of these states that he's suing changed their election laws during COVID, really to try to make it easier for people to vote during the midst of a pandemic that was affecting us all, he's saying that they shouldn't have been allowed to make those changes. And so now all of the votes need to be thrown out for everyone, which again is just a huge leap. And on top of that, Texas, we changed our laws in the midst of COVID. We gave ourselves an extra week of early voting so that people had the time to get out and vote, and that we were able to practice more safe. We were able to have more safe practices during early voting. And so is Texas going to sue ourselves? That's the question that this comes down to, is that Ken Paxton's really being hypocritical with this lawsuit. And he's also just making huge leaps. One other thing that I'll mention, and I don't want to get like too technical because I feel like this is getting into, the weeds a little bit, but Paxton filed this lawsuit directly in the Supreme Court. Typical lawsuits go through a system. They have to go to the federal district court, and then they have to go to the appeals court, and then they make their way to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court decides to take the case. And Paxton instead decided that he wanted to skip all the way to the Supreme Court, and he's requesting that they use something called their original jurisdiction to try this case. And that's something that they've been very they haven't used as often in the past. They're very wary when it comes to using their original jurisdiction because it's not something that they're really supposed to take advantage of. So he's basically asking for these 9 justices to decide the results of this election, a democratic election that millions of voters and millions of Americans voted in. And at the end of the day, we should have the say about who becomes our next president, not the 9 justices on the Supreme Court.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Like literally, I don't have all the information in my head. Wesley, you're like, thank you for being a great source for this kind of stuff. It's not surprising that a Texas GOP person is the one who's trying to suppress votes, even in other states. That's how much they love doing it. So this is obviously why Ken Paxton is like in the news, but he's been in our news in Texas for a really long time. Ed, do you want to tell us a little bit of why he's so infamous here in Texas?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have been saying here at Progress Texas, I know other people have been saying it too, is that maybe what Ken Paxton is really gunning for here is a pardon from Donald Trump. And the reason he would be looking for a pardon is because the guy's got a history of legal problems to begin with, starting from shortly after he got elected in 2014. In 2015, 6 months into the job, he had a felony indictment for securities fraud. That indictment is still underway. It's bounced around from courts in Collin County down to Houston and then back up again. And they're still trying to sort that out. In addition to that, he recently has been investigated by the FBI for some other issues having to do with his donors. There are many infractions. This guy is not known for his legal acuity. It's ironic because he is the state's top law enforcement official. He is the top cop, and he is the statewide official who has the most legal problems right now. Like we said in our Best of the Week email this week, it's lunacy and larceny that comes from this guy, and he's well known for it.
Yeah, I feel like I might be someone, like you mentioned, Sophic, that might have been living under a rock for a while. There's just so much mismanagement from what's supposed to be the leadership here in Texas, which has been, the GOP, that it's really hard to pay attention to all the mismanagement that everyone's been doing in Texas. But when it comes to Ken Paxton, I've always wondered, why is he still in office? How is he not left yet or been fired? How can someone have so many indictments? It feels overwhelming. I don't understand.
Well, and what's sad, Diana, is I completely agree with you. And the fact of the matter is, it's because he's not being held accountable by the Republicans who are in his party. You know, we talk about how terrible Ken Paxton is, but at the end of the day, the whole tree is rotten. Like the whole apple tree is rotten. And so this corruption with Paxton probably goes a lot deeper within the Texas GOP than we really think it does. And one thing I'll mention, Ed talked about, you know, the FBI investigation that's happening right now because his top aides accused him of bribery and accused him of abusing office.
His own people.
Yeah, his own people turned on him. That should tell you something. But just this week, the FBI actually issued at least one subpoena that we know of. There could be more. And that's a really big deal because issuing a federal subpoena to a state agency, and especially one that involves like the state's top attorney, it's a pretty rare move, and it likely would have required a higher level of approval from the U.S. Department of Justice. So that just shows how serious this investigation is that's being done into him, and how it's like crazy to think that in the midst of this investigation, he's still able to get away with filing these kinds of suits in the Supreme Court, you know, trying to take away and overturn millions of votes when he shouldn't even be in office to begin with. Like, the man's a potential criminal. If all of these allegations of him end up being proven true, he should be in prison. He shouldn't be trying cases in the Supreme Court.
Oh boy, Ken Paxton. Yeah, and the thing about his staff turning against him is so notable. Like, you just don't see that often. And by the way, he has fired all of them since then, which I think may violate other whistleblower laws. I'm not clear, but you can read all about it in the article that we put out in Best of the Week today. It'll be up on our social handles as well, but it's 7 reasons why Ken Paxton shouldn't be in office.
And speaking of that, if for those who are interested in looking at the future, when can we get him out of office if like nothing else works out? When is his term up?
He'll be up again in 2022.
Yeah.
He was up in 2014. Justin Nelson ran a very strong campaign against him in 2018. Got 47% of the votes. People often think about Texas as a one-sided red state, not realizing that our elections really are that close. Ken Paxton only got 51% of the vote. But for the 4 million of us that did not vote for him, we'll get a second chance in a little less than 2 years here. But there's so many other reasons. You know, he's got a lot of his legal infractions, the problems with his job, but his policy positions are terrible too.
Yeah, and just a reminder, if you're coming to us on Facebook or Twitter or Periscope or YouTube, feel free to drop any questions. We got these 3 amazing experts. We'll be happy to tackle those, like, as we get to them. And Ed, you were mentioning, like, what about his policies? What does he actually stand for?
Well, I know what he stands against. He has stood for making it harder to vote. He has been the lead attorney in trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act, arguing that it is a law that we don't need, even in the midst of a pandemic, even representing a state that has the highest uninsured population in America. So what is that? That's voting issues that he's against. That's healthcare he's against. Diana, I know that he was involved in a lot of abortion policy where he was opposing, again, during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think in terms of healthcare, you know, one of the few times that, or when I was alerted about who is Ken Paxton, besides being everywhere in the news from lately, all of his employees, you know, quitting and turning against him, was that in the beginning of the pandemic, you know, he got together with Abbott, and instead of both prioritizing public health and the healthcare of all Texans and protecting us, they instead used it as a Republican conservative tactics to attack our healthcare, to attack specifically abortion rights, and to try to restrict access for Texans who needed this essential healthcare to have abortions. And so they wasted so much time, so much of our money in these back and forth lawsuits trying to restrict our rights on that. And it didn't work. And yeah, it's great to thinking about looking ahead to, make sure he stops wasting our time and stop this circus that we just keep watching that was confined previously to Texas, and now he's taken the circus to the whole country so that everyone can watch and see what's happening.
So
and new places, new California.
Yeah. Ed mentioned voting rights as well. And so while he was doing those back and forth abortion cases, he was also pushing back on Texans' attempts to expand voting by mail during the pandemic too. So instead of spending his time as the top lawyer in Texas trying to help people through this pandemic, he was really just spending our money, refusing to give people access to abortion, refusing to expand voting rights so that people could vote safely in the pandemic, and then also Ed mentioned healthcare. He's been behind this Medicaid lawsuit since the beginning. It originated in Texas. He's trying to take away healthcare from millions of Americans. And then on top of that, back in 2015, when the Supreme Court issued the same-sex marriage decision, he actually told the county clerks at that time that they didn't have to issue marriage licenses.
That's right.
So when you look at every single issue, every single civil rights issue, any kind of issue that progressives are for, Ken Paxton is against, and there's been a lawsuit in the past proving that he's against it.
It's really interesting now that he's taken this case directly to the Supreme Court when he was the guy that really tried to flout the Supreme Court's ruling in 2015. Man, it would be great to see if the justices are like, oh, well, you didn't listen to us last time, so why should we listen to you this time?
We can only hope. Any last words on Ken and his crimes and his lawsuits and all the whole menagerie of disaster that is Ken Paxton?
I mean, we could talk about this guy for hours, but
and that's because he's one of the worst Texans of this year. Wesley, you're working on a project right now, which we could probably use some help from our audience. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I can plug it real fast. We right now have a best and worst survey that we're working on. And I think around this conversation about Paxton, it's super relevant. Every year, the Progress Texas team, we do a roundup of the year's best and worst Texans. And this year, we're wanting feedback from our readers and from our viewers, I guess, too. And you can fill out that survey. We're going to post it in the comments. And I think it's safe to say Paxton is definitely going to land himself a spot on this list, not even just because of this most recent lawsuit, but because of his work throughout the year to really sabotage any kind of progress here in our state. But we also want to hear from you who else you think should be on the list. So please fill out that survey, and we're going to be taking into consideration what our readers and what our viewers feel we should include and who they feel we should include.
I'm going to just drop that into the comments, so feel free to take a look at it this weekend rather. Let us know who you think should be on our list. Ed, Diana, Wesley, as always, y'all are just such good people to learn about what's going on in Texas. Thank you so. And do you have any final words? Anyone?
I'm just trying to find out what new states we get over the weekend.
Yeah, and how did they vote in the election? I'm very curious.
What are they going to do with a state that already starts with new?
New squared.
Mexico, new squared. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, I think, folks, be sure to check out the article as well as the best and worst. And yeah.
And we'll see you next week. Have an